When he said, "You're not from here," she showed a document that changed everything. What happens when a woman brings food to her sick neighbor, only to be accused of not belonging in the neighborhood? She shows one document, and what happened next left the entire room speechless. The sun had begun its descent, casting elongated shadows across the faded sidewalks of Fairview, a town that boasted welcome signs on every block, signs painted in cheerful fonts with pastel colors, but whose warmth stopped dead at the city limits. Behind those signs lived a town clinging to its traditions like a lifeline. And when you scratched beneath the surface, that charm crumbled into something far more brittle, far more telling. Elise Johnson walked down Pine Grove Lane, holding a plastic container filled with still warm homemade hand pies, apple and cinnamon, wrapped in flaky dough like tiny care packages. The smell curled up from the vents, comforting, familiar. Her braids lifted gently in the late July breeze as red dust blew across the narrow road. She smiled softly. Today was a good day. Miss Edna, her sharp-tongued, reclusive neighbor, had finally returned from the hospital after 3 grueling weeks in the ICU. And Elise, well, she was the only one on the street who had visited Edna during that time, the only one who hadn't needed an excuse. As she neared the familiar porch, she spotted something off. A white SUV idling in the driveway. Government plates. Official looking. The kind of vehicle that didn't belong in front of Edna's humble one-story clapboard house. Elise's steps quickened. She climbed the cracked wooden steps, careful not to spill the pies, and knocked 3 times on the screen door. A raspy voice answered. "Who is it?" "It's Elise, Miss Edna. I brought you something sweet." The door creaked open, and there stood Edna, wrapped in a worn robe, gray hair uncombed, her eyes heavy but alert. The kind of woman who'd yell at kids for stepping on her lawn, but keep extra chairs on the porch just in case one of them needed to sit down. "Apple pies?" she asked, her voice lighter now. "With cinnamon, just like you like them," Elise replied, offering a small grin. "Lord have mercy. Come in, baby. But just for a minute, I've got company." Before she could finish the sentence, a man stepped out of the hallway, wearing a city services badge, and the kind of authority that didn't need to be spoken to be felt. His uniform was crisp, his eyes sharp and scanning. The kind of gaze that cataloged people before they ever said a word. Everything in Elise's body stiffened. He looked her up and down with deliberate slowness. "Everything all right here?" he asked. Not to Edna, but to Elise, as if she were the disruption. Edna straightened slightly. "This is my neighbor. She brought me something to eat." "Right," the man said, dragging the word. "You live around here?" he asked Elise, his tone hardening. "I live across the street," she replied, still calm. "Number 74B, for the past 3 years." He folded his arms. 3 years? That's odd. I patrol this block once a month. Don't recall seeing you. Elise's voice didn't waver. "Maybe you just didn't notice." His lip twitched. "Got any ID on you?" he asked flatly. "Excuse me?" she said, momentarily stunned. "Increased break-ins lately," he muttered, adjusting his belt. "Wouldn't want someone pretending to be a friendly neighbor. You understand?" Edna whipped her head toward him. "Thomas, are you serious? This girl's daddy helped fix my back fence last summer. She's here every week." "I'm just following protocol," he replied, his tone growing clipped. "Identification, please." Elise didn't move immediately. Her fingers tightened around the pie container, the warmth now feeling oddly misplaced in her hands. She reached into her bag, pulled out her wallet, and handed him her driver's license. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper. The kind of sting that only comes when kindness is met with suspicion. He read the name aloud. "Elise Johnson, professor of history, Brunkley University." He arched an eyebrow. "A professor? In Fairview? I live here," she replied, sharper now. "And I'm conducting independent research on African American land history across Georgia counties, including this one, fully authorized by municipal documentation." "Research?" he echoed with mock interest. "Mind showing proof?" She opened her phone, scrolled to an official email, complete with city seal, QR code, and the deputy mayor's signature, and handed it to him. He squinted at it, his eyes narrowing further. Then suddenly he shoved the phone and ID back into her hands in a brisk motion. All right, just let's make sure next time you notify someone when you're walking onto someone else's property." Edna blinked, stunned. She wasn't on someone else's property. She was on mine, and she's the only person who's remembered me since I got home. But Thomas had already turned toward the door, muttering just loud enough for both of them to hear. "Not from around here. That's for sure." Elise stood on the threshold, her arms stiff, container still warm in her hands but suddenly unbearably heavy. The pies remained untouched, and in that moment, The sweetness of the act turned bitter. She looked out at the street, the porch lights flickering on across the block, shadows of neighbors shifting behind curtains, peeking without participating, watching without acting. Every window was a silent accomplice. It wasn't what he said that hurt the most. It was that no one else said anything at all. At exactly 10:05 a.m., Elise Johnson stood in front of the heavy, stone-framed doors of the Lawton County Municipal Archive. The building looked more like a courthouse than a record storage facility. Tall Corinthian columns, bronze plaques worn smooth by time, and ivy curling along the edges like it had something to hide. There was something about the way the morning light hit those doors that made the whole place feel more like a monument to silence than a temple of knowledge. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder bag and took a breath, not out of nerves, but calculation. The invitation had come the night before, an unexpected email marked Urgent Access Protocol Review. It wasn't a request, it was a summons, the kind that came dressed up in courtesy but smelled like containment, the kind that made your gut tighten before your brain even caught up. As she approached the steps, a man in a sharp gray suit emerged from the shadows near the entrance, as if he'd been waiting there the whole time. "Good morning, Miss Johnson," he said without smiling. His voice was even, but the kind of even that says, "I've already made up my mind about you. Please come with me. Conference room is ready." He didn't offer his name. Elise didn't ask for it. Inside, the building was too quiet, the kind of sterile silence that existed only in places where decisions were made behind locked doors. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but nobody seemed to notice. Like everyone had grown numb to the sound of bureaucracy humming in the background of their lives. When they entered the conference room, 3 people were already seated around a long, polished table. On the left, a woman in her early 40s, sharp blazer, sharper cheekbones, eyes like glass. She was the kind of professional who made sure her pen matched her shoes. Across from her sat an elderly man, thin as paper, hands trembling slightly as he clutched a file folder like it might fly away. His nameplate read, Gerald W. Fox, Senior Archivist. And at the far end of the table, with that same uniform as yesterday, sat Thomas Craig, still stiff, still armed with suspicion, and still wearing that smug little smirk that said, "You don't belong here." "Miss Johnson," the woman began, her tone diplomatic but tight, "we've reviewed your request for access to Section 8, the pre-1965 land transfer records. In light of a recent incident, we've had to reevaluate certain access protocols." Elise didn't wait for the spin to land. "You mean the incident where one of your officers questioned my right to be in my own neighborhood while I was delivering food to a sick neighbor?" she said, her voice cool but unmistakably firm. "Is that the incident we're discussing?" There was a flicker, barely perceptible in the woman's expression. The old archivist coughed into his handkerchief. "That's not the issue at hand," the man said hoarsely. "The concern is archival integrity. Some of the documents you're seeking may have been, at one point, relocated to a restricted zone back in 1984. We're not entirely sure your current authorization level qualifies you for access." "I have a federal research grant," Elise responded, eyes locked on the woman, "and a signed letter from your city's own deputy mayor. Are you telling me that in Lawton, access to public records depends not on qualification, but on who's asking?" Thomas Craig let out a low chuckle. "Let's be honest," he muttered. "Most of the people studying our history grew up around here." Elise turned to him slowly, deliberately. Her voice dropped, but every word hit like a gavel. "By our, you mean white?" His smirk faded. The room stilled. "This isn't about memory," she continued. "It's about land. Land that was taken from black families under the guise of post-war redevelopment. My inquiry is centered on one such plot where, in 1952, a family lost everything under circumstances that, on paper, don't add up. And what I think scares you is the possibility that I might uncover exactly why." The woman began nervously shuffling her documents. "We're not denying you access completely," she said quickly. "We're simply placing a temporary hold. We need to verify the authenticity of your sources." Elise didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and laid 3 documents on the table, one by one. "This," she said, pointing to the first, "is a letter from Brunkley University validating my field research." She pointed to the second. "This is a legal opinion from a federal attorney confirming my right to public archive access under Title V." Then she tapped the third, a fragile, yellowed card encased in plastic. "And this is an original cadastral record I found in an unindexed drawer of your own basement section. It carries the signature of William C. Miller, and it references Plot 118A, A parcel that, as of today, doesn't exist in your system. So either it was erased or your records are incomplete. Which is it? Fox paled. His hand trembled harder now. We have no record of that parcel, he whispered. Exactly, Elise said. Because someone erased it. That's why I'm here. Your version of history was written to forget people like my grandfather, and I'm here to remember them, loudly. The silence that followed was not just awkward, it was damning. You're accusing us of fraud? Inspector Clark finally asked, breaking the tension with a hushed rasp. I'm not accusing, Elise replied. I'm stating a pattern, and unless I get full access to that record room, I'll take these documents to a federal court. I'll file for public mismanagement, obstruction of archival transparency, and yes, I'll name Mr. Craig specifically for violating civil protocol during a research investigation. And we'll let the press decide what story they want to tell about Lawton's transparent history. Thomas shoved back his chair, voice rising. You came here to stir up trouble, to dismantle everything we've built. No, Elise said, meeting his glare with steady defiance. I came here for the truth. That it scares you? That's not my burden. The woman in the blazer, up until now silent in her indecision, exchanged a long glance with Fox. Then, without further discussion, she said flatly, grant her access. 48 hours. Supervised. Thomas sprang up livid. This is insane. It's the law, the archivist murmured, still staring at the old card in Elise's hand, like it had started to glow. Elise said nothing more. She just picked up her papers, packed them into her bag with the same care she would handle a precious heirloom, and nodded once, slow and deliberate, before walking out of the room with the quiet power of someone who knew. Once the truth starts to breathe, it doesn't stop until the walls fall down. The basement of the Lawton County Archive was not just cold, it was unnaturally silent. The kind of silence that seems to press in on your ears, like even the air itself knows too much. Every step Elise took down the narrow staircase echoed off the concrete walls, her boots clicking like punctuation in an old unread novel. The fluorescent lights flickered above, humming weakly, as if reluctant to witness what was about to unfold. Beside her, Reuben, the archivist assigned to supervise, moved slowly but deliberately, a man in his late 60s with a trim white beard and the weary eyes of someone who had spent too many years surrounded by history but forbidden to touch the parts that mattered. He carried a manila folder and a single brass key. He hadn't said much since meeting her at the front desk, just nodded once and led the way. But now, in the dim light of the lower floor, his silence felt heavier, as though it came from knowledge rather than habit. When they reached the final door, thick, metal, and bolted into the floor, Reuben paused. This is it, he murmured, slipping the key into the lock with a faint metallic click. Only 2 hours. Direct access to sectors 8A and 8B. Nothing else. That'll be more than enough, Elise said, her voice steady as she pulled a notebook and voice recorder from her satchel. Her heart was hammering, not from nerves, but from instinct. She could feel it. Truth was close, closer than it had ever been. Inside the room, the air was dense with dust and time. The fluorescent lights cast a yellow haze over rusted shelving units, each packed tight with boxes marked in long-faded ink. Everything here had been forgotten on purpose. You could smell it. There were maps patched with old tape, stacks of brittle land ledgers bound in cloth, and cadastral cards scattered like fallen leaves. But it was all organized, and somewhere in this forgotten order lay a thread worth pulling. She moved to the shelf marked M Block 1952 and slid out a cardboard box with worn corners. As she laid the contents across a nearby table, her eyes began scanning line by line, absorbing names, signatures, and lot numbers. It didn't take long before her breath caught. Miller, she read aloud, again and again. The name appeared repeatedly across different documents, always connected to post-war redevelopment grants. But then, struck through twice, in a thick pen stroke, she saw something else. Nyanu, her great-grandfather's name. Beside it, someone had scrawled, origin unknown, missing data, a lie disguised as bureaucracy. Elise's pulse quickened. Her great-grandfather, Isaac Nganu, had been a decorated veteran of World War II, a tailor by trade, a landowner by right. He had applied for a parcel under the Federal Land Reallocation Act, one of the few black men to receive approval in that area. But the story passed through her family was that the land had slipped through the cracks. No one questioned it anymore. Not because they believed it, but because they had learned to stop asking. She reached for the next file in the box and stopped cold. There it was, the original land map, with the plot clearly marked 118A, signed, stamped, dated. There was no question it had been legally registered. But next to it, A second document, half torn with different ink, different signatures. A seizure order. Stamped emergency transfer with authorization granted to one W. Howard, a sitting county board member at the time. And beneath that, expedited reassignment in absence of verified ownership by African-American resident. It was right there. No euphemisms, no coded language, just raw, institutional theft. Elise didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, took photos of every page, then hit record on her voice memo app. Documented evidence of land seizure based on racial classification. Owner, Isaac Nanu. Transfer unauthorized. Signatures appear inconsistent with 1952 county standard. This constitutes probable grounds for legal restitution under federal statute. Behind her, Reuben cleared his throat. Miss Johnson, you're not permitted to take pictures in this sector. She didn't even turn around. Then you'll have to call security, she replied, because if I leave here empty-handed, then all of this goes back to being forgotten, and I won't let that happen. There was a pause, a long one. I've worked in this archive for 28 years, Reuben said quietly. I always knew there was filth buried down here, but nobody ever wanted to dig. Nobody dared. Thank you for not being one of them. That night, Elise didn't sleep. She uploaded every image, every file, every time-stamped note to an encrypted drive. She drafted a detailed memo outlining her findings, names, dates, potential violations of federal and state law, and sent it to 3 civil rights legal clinics, a university newspaper, and a known independent journalist who ran an investigative history series on YouTube. The backlash was swift. By sunrise, she received a call from Layla Brooks, an attorney with the National Coalition for Land Restitution. Miss Johnson, I saw what you sent, Layla said, voice brisk but clear. It's a powder keg. I've already reviewed the statute. You've got legal standing, and I've spoken to 11 families in the region. Same story, same signature patterns. We're filing a class action lawsuit by Monday, but I won't lie, this will get loud. And it did. 2 hours later, Elise was barred from re-entering the archive. A man in a plain suit handed her a printed memo that said her research access was temporarily suspended pending review of source integrity. The language was cold, sanitized, but the message was clear. She had poked too hard. She had gotten too close. That same morning, she opened her mailbox to find no bills, no flyers, just a single envelope, no return address. Inside, a sheet of printer paper, one sentence in bold typeface. You're not one of us. You should have left well enough alone. We still decide who gets to stay here. Elise sat down on her porch steps. No panic, no tears, just stillness. She laid the letter beside the seizure document she had copied the night before. Isaac's name stared up at her like a challenge. She could almost feel him watching her, waiting. They said I'm not from here, she whispered to no one. But this land, this silence, it was built by people like us, buried under maps and laws designed to forget us. She looked out over her neighborhood, the porches, the mailboxes, the cracked sidewalks, and knew exactly what came next. I'm not leaving, she said. I came back to finish what they started. They didn't expect her to come back. After the archives closed their doors, after her research access was revoked, after the quiet threat in her mailbox whispered, "Stay gone," the town collectively exhaled. Elise Johnson was supposed to be just another flare of outrage. Brief, inconvenient, and ultimately forgettable. But on the third morning, just as the sun broke over the Lawton County Courthouse, the front doors swung open and she walked inside. Not shaken, not uncertain. She walked like someone who had been underestimated one too many times. This time, Elise wore a navy blue blazer, sharp enough to cut glass. Her hair was pulled back into a braided crown. On her chest was a laminated badge, freshly printed. Lawton Civil Restitution Coalition, Interim Representative. That title had not existed 48 hours ago, but when truth moves fast enough, it creates its own lanes. At the entrance, the security guard, no longer Thomas Craig, who had been quietly reassigned following a formal misconduct inquiry, opened the door without hesitation. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't pretend not to see her. He simply nodded, respectfully. For the first time since her arrival, the building seemed to recognize her presence not as disruption, but as authority. Inside, the chamber for the county council meeting was packed, standing room only, the kind of crowd that only shows up when someone touches the town's myth of itself, the kind of gathering that meant everyone knew something was about to shift. Elise stepped toward the podium. Behind her, a half-circle of allies, civil rights attorneys, university researchers, local war veterans, students still in their caps and gowns. To her right, the front 2 rows were filled with descendants of the displaced, Black families who had been pushed off their own land under false pretense, hidden legislation, and forged signatures. Each of them carried a folder. Each folder held something once lost. A hush fell over the room. "You said I'm not from here," Elise began. Her voice wasn't raised, but it vibrated through the room like a tuning fork. "But my roots are deeper than this courthouse. This land was ours before it was drawn on a single zoning map. And yes, this land was taken, not by mistake, not by accident, but by coordinated, quiet theft." She paused, scanning the room. People were listening, really listening. "So today," she continued, "you have a decision to make. Will you continue to be part of the silence? Or will you finally write your name into the chapter where the truth is told?" From the council bench, a man stirred. The chairperson stood, clearly agitated. "We don't have the mechanisms in place to—" "You do," interrupted Layla Brooks, rising beside Elise. Her voice cut clean through the tension. "Restitution Act of 1968, federal mandate, case precedent, Green v. Charlotte County, verified by the Supreme Court in 1972. You don't just have a mechanism, you have an obligation." There was a murmur among the crowd. Papers shuffled, eyes darted. Then something rare happened. A member of the council, a white man in his mid-60s with a red tie and a lined face, stood slowly. "My family moved here in '59, he said. "We built a life here. But we did it on soil someone else lost. I vote in favor of reopening every single case connected to those seizures. Full review, full restitution." Another council member stood, then another. 4, 6. By the end of the vote, it was unanimous. The crowd didn't cheer, it didn't erupt. Instead, it inhaled the moment like oxygen after too long underwater. The council formally passed a motion. All land seized from black families between 1948 and 1966 under redevelopment policies would be reviewed. Property would be returned where possible, financial restitution provided where not. A civilian-led commission, independent, diverse, and transparent, would oversee the entire process. That would have been victory enough. But then something happened Elise never saw coming. An elderly man in a tweed jacket slowly rose from the back. He carried a thick black journal in his hand, leather-bound, frayed along the edges. I've worked in the Lawton archive since 1977, he said, voice shaking but clear. "And I've kept something I was told never to log, never to digitize." He walked down the aisle, stopped in front of Elise, and gently handed her the journal. "This belonged to your great-grandfather, Isaac Nanu. It's his diary. I never read it fully, but the first page," he took a breath, "the first page says, if they claim we were never here, show them the earth beneath your feet." Elise opened the journal with reverent fingers. The ink was faded but legible. Her throat caught. That night, she didn't sleep again. 2 months later, where there once was a patch of untended field, a new building stood, the Lawton Archive Pavilion for Belonging and Memory. It wasn't a statue. It didn't stand tall to glorify. It sat low to the earth, built of reclaimed wood and brick from neighborhoods that had once been demolished under the guise of progress. Inside, under glass, was the land deed of the Ngannou family. Next to it, an interactive map. Tap a lot number, and a story appeared, of lives interrupted, but not erased. Elise was named as founding curator, not for the recognition, but to ensure that what happened once would never vanish again. On the day of the opening, the line wrapped around the block, but the moment that stayed with Elise didn't come from applause, or speeches, or the mayor's handshake. It came when she saw Miss Edna, stooped but proud, standing at the entrance, holding a plate covered in foil. Elise stepped forward, tears already rising. Miss Edna gave her a nod. "I came to say thank you," she said, "for reminding this place who it really is." Elise smiled, blinking quickly. "No," she whispered. "I just reminded them who I am." And as she looked around at the faces, black, brown, white, young, old, standing side by side under one roof of truth, she realized something else. They didn't expect her to come back, but now they'd never forget she had.